Hello everyone and welcome back to another very special Kerbal Space Program video. Why is today's Kerbal video a very special one, you may ask? Why, because this marks the first episode of a brand new series I'm doing that'll consist of 2 videos, in which I recreate the proposed Columbus Station, the European Space Agency's plan to build their own independent space station, launched and serviced entirely by ESA rockets and ESA space shuttles. As you can see on screen, construction of the station is well underway. There's conflicting concept diagrams about what the station would have actually looked like, but most of the schematics begin and end at the thing I'm building here, a small craft similar in size to Skylab, but there were concepts for future extensions, and since this is KSP, I thought let's go the full 9 yards and recreate what I think was the best looking configuration of the station. At the moment, I'm building it like I usually build my multi-launch craft, in that we'll build it as it will be in orbit, and then I'll slice it up into launchable chunks and then store each module inside a payload fairing ready for launch. Interestingly, in many ways, one could say that the ESA did in fact build its own space station, the Space Lab, which was placed in the payload bay of a space shuttle and flew on a total of 32 missions. Of course, it's hardly fair to call this an independent space station given its total reliance on the shuttle, but it was a start, and its development definitely taught the ESA a thing or two about building orbital habitats, and it's no surprise then that Ronald Reagan approached them in 1984 to see if they wanted to build a module for America's planned space station Freedom, which would eventually end up evolving into today's International Space Station. ESA signed up to the offer and began development of the Columbus project, which would involve a number of things, including the agency building a module for the station. Another component of the Columbus project would be the construction of a 2-segment uncrewed module, which could actually detach from the Freedom Station and then go to a nearby orbit, allowing for remotely controlled experiments isolated from the noisy crewed Freedom Station itself. Upon completion of any tasks and experiments, it could then return to the station for maintenance and resupply. Of course, as we know, the Freedom Station never got built, and as the project started encountering hurdles and cuts in Congress, ESA began developing backup plans for the Columbus project should the Freedom Station be cancelled. And, well, the Columbus Independent Space Station, which I'm building in this video, is the outcome of that contingency plan. In fact, I've actually finished building it, and now I'm just packing it up into a launchable configuration. So there's these 2 arms here that's like, this is the smallest payload out of all of them, but I couldn't find a way of integrating these modules with like a bigger launch, so this is its own launch here, and then we'll build the other launch vehicles in due course. For the launch vehicle itself, I'm going to stay true to real life, or at least, I'm going to stay true to real life if this thing actually happened, and use a European rocket. And I feel like the Ariane 5 would be the rocket that would have been used to launch this, since that's, the premier Ariane space rocket used by the ESA, and its heavy lift rocket, it could do this mission. And we have Ariane 5 parts in KSP, although I'm not the biggest fan of the Ariane 5 components because they're not quite, I don't think the scale is quite right. It's a bit too tall and a bit too skinny. Like the SRBs on the Ariane 5 are a bit more bulky and shorter than the ones we have in game, but I'd say it's close enough, and it does look better than the other SRBs, chiefly because it has those decorative flags that make it look a little bit more authentic to the real thing. And yes, that's the first module. Well, actually, this is going to be the last module that gets launched, but it's the first rocket that I'm building here for reasons, I guess. I don't know why I built it in this order. We're going to put some little ESA liveries on the side, so Ariane Space on the upper stage, ESA on the lower stage. Now we're going to add the next module to payload fairing. I'd say this is the most realistic Ariane 5 I'll be launching in this video. The previous one we just built had a very wide fairing. It didn't look quite right. This one does have a wider than normal fairing for the Ariane 5, but it's pretty close. Like, this one looks the most like a real Ariane 5, I think. And I'm just going to say right now, guys, I'm not the most proud of the 3rd Ariane 5 I'll be building in this video. It's got a very wide fairing, a very comically wide fairing. I just couldn't find a way of folding up the module so that I could, unpack it and keep it in a small fairing whilst also maintaining the aesthetic I wanted once the space station was built. So the compromise is that, we got 2 kind of realistic looking Ariane 5s as launch vehicles, and then 1 just dumb looking Ariane 5 with a really, really wide upper fairing. It's not that bad, but it's pretty bad. It's the escape module there. I couldn't really find a way of getting that. In an ideal world, I would have stacked that on top of the other module, but I couldn't find a way of doing it elegantly. And this is just the compromise. I'm sorry, guys. I hope you forgive me for this. Forgive me for I have sinned. But it's what it is. I don't know what else to say. I'm just sort of... I shouldn't really be trying to dig myself a hole, right? Saying, oh, by the way, guys, this rocket sucks, don't worry. But I'm just warning you before you write a comment saying, Matt, that's not actually what the Ariane 5 looks like. It actually looks like a normal rocket, and you are correct. It does look like a normal rocket, and this one doesn't. But it's a compromise, and it means we do less launches overall. I could have done a 4th launch, so then we could have had a more realistic-looking rocket, but I think 3 launches down, that's like a good length for a video. Any more than that, it's dragging it out a bit too long. Anyway, here is the first of our Ariane 5s. And this is the most realistic one out of all of them, I think. So we're going to launch the core Columbus station, which could well have been the beginning and end of the Columbus program, should this have been built. It could have just been left as this, a bit like a Skylab or a Salyut station, but we're going to go down the more fun path of alternate history and extend it into a nice big beefy space station, probably just like a little bit smaller than Mir. Well, a lot smaller than Mir, a lot smaller than the ISS, and a little bit smaller than Mir, and bigger than Skylab, and much bigger than Spacelab. Anyway, I don't know why I'm waffling on. Is there much to talk about really at this point? I guess the Ariane 5 is a dumb rocket to be using for this. Like, the Ariane 5, first of all, because it's a bit too narrow for the payload, so we end up having this really comically wide fairing, as I've already dribbled on about for ages, but I'm just saying that's a thing. And also, it's way too powerful for me to do. Like, I had to drain a lot of the fuel out of the first, like the core stage that's currently burning there, and I turned down the thrust limiter of the solid rocket motors, and I removed some of the solid fuel just to kind of nerf the rocket to make it a somewhat sensible seeming vehicle, and we do still end up with loads and loads of Delta V in the upper stage. And speaking of the upper stage, I did make one modification to it, which obviously the real Ariane 5 doesn't have, and that is an automated upper stage that can relight its engine and deorbit itself manually, because orbital decay is not a thing in Kerbal Space Program. In real life, it doesn't really matter if the second stage gets left in orbit, which is always the case, because eventually orbit decays. Like, take for example the SpaceX Starlink launches. You know, the Falcon 9 upper stage, it stays in space, but it doesn't go to a very high orbit, so eventually it decays and re-enters the atmosphere. Kerbal Space Program, that doesn't happen. There's no orbital decay. So I think that's kind of a good reason I can justify having a deorbit capability to my upper stages. And you know, as we say here at Lowne Aerospace, we save the space dolphins. We are unnecessarily polluting space, I guess, in a way, because this is my sandbox save, and space stations in KSP generally are pointless anyway, so we are needlessly polluting space, I guess, but we're not leaving any debris in orbit, and that's the main thing, really. And there we are. There we have it. There's the Columbus station there. So the lower stage has detached. We can rename it to the Columbus Space Station and change the little icon so it appears on the map screen properly. And there it is. We can deploy... Oh, actually, no. I thought I was going to deploy the panels and pistons and stuff and then deorbit this stage, but I guess I'm doing it the other way around. And because I'm professional, I'm not going to pause the commentary and do it again. I feel like I always do this, guys. Whenever I'm doing like a video where I'm trying to be educational, you know, I'll have all the facts I want to say and then just rip through them really quickly in the first 5 minutes. Then I'm like, oh, now we've still got 20 minutes of video left. And oh, wow, what a realistic Ariane 5, by the way, on screen. Just ignore. When the fairing disappears, we can pretend it was like a normal looking Ariane 5. And I didn't even mention now that I deployed the solar panels and the antenna on the station. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Anyway, starting to waffle a little bit, so let's try and bring things back on track, back in focus as to what's going on screen. Actually, I'm going to talk about stuff that is not on screen, has already happened, but I didn't talk about it at the time because, as I mentioned, I was just ripping through all my Columbus facts really quickly and now have run out of all of them. But during the build, you may have noticed, well, to rewind further, the other space station recreation I've done in the past was I did a big recreation of the International Space Station, like 1-to-1 scale. Well, you know, 1 to Kerbal scale, if Kerbal scale was the same as human scale, which is like 1:8, I think. Anyway, when I built my International Space Station replica, it didn't look as aesthetically accurate as a lot of ISS replicas in KSP, because what most people do when recreating the ISS in KSP is they build it out of structural pieces and fairing pieces, and not the crew modules, because the crew modules in KSP have got these big cartoonish windows on them, whereas the ISS doesn't really have any windows, save for like a couple, so it doesn't really look perfect if you use the KSP crew modules to build the station. So a lot of people build it out of fairing pieces, fuel tanks, things like that. But I thought, I'm going to make a Kerbal version of the ISS. I want to keep it looking aesthetically like the right layout and the right scales and all that, but I'm going to build it out of KSP modules so that it's functional. Like, this could just be a space station that someone would build in KSP if the ISS didn't exist and we only had the Columbus station instead. So I built it out of modules and stuff. So I think it was quite a good recreation. I think it looked aesthetically very close to the ISS, but it had all the cool things like the big cool windows and the Kerbal-y bits that made it a bit more unique than the boring human space station. Anyway, bit of a tangent, but this does have a point. This time I thought, let's try and make it look a bit more realistic, the Columbus station. So the lab module I just launched was the KSP lab, because I wanted it to have some function and some ability to have crew on board. So that's the unrealistic bit, having that big lab. It probably wouldn't have 6 giant windows like my Kerbal version has. But for the rest of the station, I'm building it out of structural pieces because they look more aesthetically close to the station concepts that I'm basing this on, and also they're the right diameter. Like, the lab module of the Columbus station was a little bit wider than everything else on the station, and it looked to me like, translating that to KSP scale, that was like 2.5 meter diameter for the lab, 1.875 meter diameter for the rest of the space station's modules, which means that this space station is not really functional like my other space station replica was. I don't think I've ever recreated any other space station, but regardless, it's not as functional as my ISS replica or any other Kerbal space station I've ever built. This is more of a aesthetic thing. Like I say, the exception to this are the big windows on the lab, but other than that, it's mostly for the actual look of things. So it's not a particularly functional space station. Consider it a piece of space art. So you just got to use your imagination and pretend there are crew modules and things inside these structural pieces. They're not just service bays and stuff. They would have things inside them, like the pool tables, the bar, the cinema. That's what would be in here. But because I don't have those pieces in Kerbal Space Program, I'm making do with the Making History. I think they're meant to be the Gemini shrouds, but the Making History shroud service bays, whatever the game calls them. I forget. So, as you can see, we're getting ready to dock our payload to the existing space station. So the first thing I'm going to do is dock this module, the T module, I'm calling it, because it looks a bit like a T and I'm not very creative. We're going to be docking this to the aft, well, you can see which docking port I've set as my target. A little bit challenging because A, I didn't want to do the so-called Lowne lazy method of docking where we just get both ships to auto-target each other and make docking really easy, because that's not very realistic. And also it was a bit of a challenge because, as you can see, it doesn't have any RCS thrusters or any monopropellant reserves on board, so kind of a little bit finicky to get the alignment right. But as you can see, SES is very, very good in Kerbal Space Program, so it wasn't too difficult in the end. Interestingly though, for whatever reason, every time I docked something to the station, the arm here that the communication station is attached to started freaking out. The hinge kept on resetting its angle, and then the piston would start doing loads of weird things. In the end, I just left it and then just hit the action group that deploys the robotic parts, hit it once to toggle them all off, and then hit it again, toggle them all on, and that seemed to stabilize things. I'm not quite sure what that was. I've never had that happen to me before. Hopefully it won't happen to me again. But who can really say for sure? Sometimes these Kraken attacks that happen in KSP can be a little bit sporadic and without much of an explanation. Anyway, now I'm docking this module. I don't know what it would be. It was just a gold thing on the picture I was looking at, and it's got some solar panels attached to it. So that's this module here. That's the name of it. It's the gold thing with the solar panels attached to it. That's the name. The TGTWSPAI. That's the name of this module. And here is me docking it here. Not much more not much more to say about that really, is there? And did I even, no, I haven't deorbited the lower stage. Let's quickly do that now. And then we can get to launching our final Ariane 5, which doesn't look as aesthetically accurate as our first Ariane 5, but it's certainly a marked improvement on the one we just launched. So we can go ahead and do that after I look at the station. What am I doing here? Oh, I think I'm just deploying the solar panels. I thought I'd bound both the old and the new solar panels to the same action group, but then when I pressed that action group, nothing happened. So didn't get the nice cinematic synchronized panel opening that I wanted, but it's fine. We can just move on. Not quite sure why I left that in the video when I was editing this, but whatever. Here we are, launching our third and final Ariane 5 rocket. And yes, there's no crew on board, and we'll get to the crew in a second. We are going to put crew on this thing, don't worry. As you can see, when I said earlier that the Ariane 5 is a very, very overpowered launch vehicle for the Kerbal version of this station, because obviously Kerbal space program is much, much easier to reach orbit in compared to human space programs. So we don't really need a rocket as big as my Ariane 5 replica, and that's really reflected in how quickly this thing accelerated, and that was with obviously drained liquid fuel and drained solid fuel. But, it's fine. We can just point downward a little bit towards the radial in vector in order to ensure that most of our velocity is going towards raising our periapsis rather than raising our apoapsis, way higher than we needed. And this is the lightest payload. We've got so much delta field. Thought, you know what, let's just do a really lazy docking that doesn't involve getting into an initial orbit and then setting up a target encounter from there. Let's just do it from apogee. We're going to have to do a massive burn to reach the station and a massive deceleration burn once we reach the station. But hey, keeps the video nice and punchy, because I'm aware 3 launches in at this point, it's might start to drag if we do things a little bit too correctly. So let's just do everything in one big burn. I say it's a massive burn. I know that's a relative term really, because compared to our Delta V budget, 323, was that how much it was, meters per second, is quite trivial. I'm just saying, in terms of what I'm doing, docking to something in low Kerbin orbit, this is a dumb way to do it. This is not a tutorial. Do not imagine if someone clicked on this thinking it was going to be a tutorial, and then this is what they've been subjected to, just the ramblings of someone going slightly insane from the European heat wave. Is it in Europe or is it just the UK? I don't know. There's a Met Office warning about there being a really big heat wave at the moment, and it's really hard to concentrate on coherent commentary when you're stuck in a sweat box of an office with insulated walls, all the doors and windows shut, and obviously my PC churning out heat like it's a hot thing, like it's an oven. We did it, guys. I came up with a simile. Anyway, let's just try and rein things back on track and keep focusing on the video. So here you can see me attaching the first of these 2 appendages to the T module. I'm not quite sure what they are. I guess they're just extensions to the interior of that T module. In the actual diagrams I was looking at, these would have been seamless to the module that I'm docking them to. There wouldn't have been a big bridged docking port, if that makes sense. You can see how the gold module attaches to the T and how the T attaches to the lab. There's that clear docking port link. That's not really visible on the diagram, so I decided to disguise the docking connection with this with the fairing pieces there, and I think it looks pretty good actually. Having that little orange stripe added a nice little bit of flair, a bit of visual flair to the space station. So that's, I hope you agree. I thought they turned out quite nicely. And now we're just going to deorbit, do a nice close pass of the station for no one's benefit. There's no one on board. It's not even like a Top Gun moment, really, is it? And then we can go ahead and dock the final piece to the space station. Now, some of you may recall that when I was launching these 2 appendage modules, I said that we would talk about the crew, because I'm not going to leave the station uncrewed. We are going to add crew to it, but that's going to be in episode 2 of this mini-series. Some of you may recall right at the beginning of this video, I know it feels like eons ago, doesn't it? But right at the beginning, I mentioned that ESA's plan for this station would to have it be built by ESA rockets, the Ariane rockets, and then it would be serviced by ESA space shuttles. So that's what we're going to do next episode. We're going to build the ESA space shuttle, and we're going to use it to add crew to this space station, which has just been completed. I timed that perfectly. And that's it. It's a fairly modest space station, but I think it's a fairly nice looking replica. And even if you disagree, doesn't matter. It's not real. So I disagree with you, actually. I challenge you. So there we are. That's really the real reason I love recreating ships that never existed, because there's no way that I'm just shielded from all criticism. And here I am just, by the way, aligning the modules a little bit. They were pretty straight, admittedly, but I noticed I could just modify the alignment a bit to get it looking a little bit better, so that's what I was doing there. And I don't think there's anything else that needs doing. Oh yes, actually, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to test the abort module here. We've got a little escape pod there that has 3 seats in it, so this is a 3-person space station, which is what I would assume the actual Columbus space station would have been, like what the Skylab was and what the Salyut stations were. We've got a little 3-person Soyuz re-entry module there, just to serve as the escape pod, and that detached okay. I know it's not got parachutes, but you know, Kerbals have parachutes. They can just bail out. It's fine. And there's the space station there, guys. I do hope you enjoyed this video and have enjoyed the space station adventures so far. Of course, we haven't finished it just yet. That's going to be done next episode when we add the space shuttle to the mix. There's some more videos on screen if you want to watch one of those in the meantime. And also, massive thank you to my kind Patreon supporters. Their names are currently scrolling past on screen. You can also join the channel if you want by clicking the join button below the video. Help support me in that way. There's the subscribe button as well if you want to do that. And that's it. Goodbye.